I don't like in rainbows.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Listography. Coming back at you with another record ranking. Today we are counting down the Talking Heads' 8th studio albums. One of my favorite bands. Love the Talking Heads. How about you guys?
Love them. This list was a bit tough for me because there's not as much of a hierarchy among these albums as I think a lot of people consider. Not that they all blend in and are that interchangeable, but I don't think there's a lot of distinction between probably 6 through 1 for me. I like them all a good bit.
I like the Talking Heads. I don't know if I love them. I certainly don't like them as much as you two. I think they have a lot of good songs. I think Stop Making Sense is pretty much perfect in sort of what I think about when I think about the Talking Heads, more so that than their individual albums. So I don't know. I have mixed feelings, but I dig them. There's certainly a good band, very influential and unique. It's not quite my style of music, but I still like them. I think they put out a lot of good songs, even if, individual albums I probably don't have any gonna appear on my top 5 lists. They're usually in the 6 through 10 range, but they're probably never gonna jump into the top 5.
So who wants to kick off the lists?
I'll start it off. I don't know what you guys are going to have at the bottom. I think my bottom pick is pretty traditional. I'm going with Naked, the last one they did, which I still like. Blind is a nice, cool, funky opener. I like Totally Nude a good bit. To me, it's just like a bit of a watered-down version of Talking Heads. He doesn't really go off the rails. It doesn't have their best melodies, their catchiest stuff, their weirdest stuff. The lyrics don't stick out as much. I do like Nothing But Flowers quite a good bit, but the whole thing just maybe is just a bit too monotonous and kind of blends together. It needs a little bit of relief from itself. You get that a little bit with the Facts of Life, but a lot of like the percussion and the drum beats and the grooves all kind of sound a little bit too similar. So through a listen 1 through 10 on the tracks, it gets a bit tiresome, not boring, but it's just not nearly as good as the other stuff for me.
Also, yep, that's my last place. Bring Up the Rear, Naked. Yeah, I think you basically said it. It's just sort of something missing. Pretty sure they broke up like immediately after this record came out. So I think they were kind of holding together by just the smallest strand at this point. There's like even more world music influence on this. There's plenty of horns, which you'd think I'd like, but just the songs just aren't quite there. And the band kind of sounds tired and ready to get on with their, solo careers and other acts.
Yeah, I also have Naked at the bottom. It's good. I like it a lot, actually, but compared to their catalog, it's pretty easily the weakest, I think. Like you guys said, I think at the time it came out, it got pretty good reviews. People were happy that they were kind of going back to that world music sound and the polyrhythm type of stuff after their last 2 records were a bit more stripped down and sort of like traditional songwriting. But I think it hasn't aged super well. I think in hindsight, people have sort of realized that the songs aren't that great. It's also front-loaded too. I think the first half of it's pretty solid, but it kind of falls apart in the back half of it. Like Cram said, I think Nothing But Flowers is the real standout here.
All right, my number 7 is going to be True Stories, which I like considerably more than Naked. It's got a nice kind of stripped-down feel for them. It's a little bit more guitar-heavy than, their percussive heavy funk beat kind of stuff, especially right off the bat with Love for Sale. That's a really great song. I love Hey Now. Wild Wild Life might be my least favorite of their big hits. It's just a little bit too jangly and chipper, I think, for my taste in Talking Heads. I do like the song Radiohead and Dream Operator. I just think compared to the other stuff, this is a very good listen, but it doesn't grip me the way a lot of their other stuff does. It's not as interesting. It doesn't do, like I said, the stuff that they're known for as much. It seems almost like a really kind of plain or safe album. I do know, and I've never seen the movie, and I know it's a soundtrack to the movie that he did. And I've never seen the movie, but, I can't really imagine what the movie's about from, I don't get a good feel couldn't tell you if it's a comedy, if it's a dark comedy, if it's a drama. There's not a whole lot of character to this, which is kind of the big symbol of David Byrne in particular. He's such a character, and he has all these eccentric sort of manifestations of his mind throughout his songs, and they're not really on this album, but it is a pretty good listen. So with a lot of really good tracks too.
Well, this pick of mine, number 7, is gonna upset some people probably in this chat room and in our viewing audience. But I have at number 7, Remain in Light. I don't get this album at all. This must be like the original In Rainbows, because it is, universally beloved. Perfect scores across the board from all the reviews I saw. Ranked 129th all time by Rolling Stone, but I can't even listen to it. Other than Once in a Lifetime and Born Under Punches, everything is it's just too much all over the place. I don't think it's sincere. I don't really like David Byrne that much. I don't find him to be all that great. I think he's sort of like he brings in all these world, Afro punk and all these influences, and I just don't think that he adds anything to them. It's just kind of sampling different styles. The songwriting, nothing grips me other than Once in a Lifetime, but there's just no melodies here. It's all just kind of, I don't know. Bars. I just don't get it. I don't like it. It's the album when I was listening through all these that I immediately just, even Naked, I had, okay, I kind of like these tracks. These are pleasant. But on this, I just can't even listen to it. I just think it's just probably the most overrated album in history. But that's just me. I don't know what to tell you.
Crazy talk. All right. Let me see here. My number 7 is also True Stories, same as Cram. I think this is probably their most sort of minimal record in terms of the instrumentation, at least since their first 2 records. But those first original 2 records of theirs were kind of sort of reinventing and remolding sort of traditional pop structures. This is more conventional, this record, which isn't bad. There's some good stuff on it. Love for Sale's cool. Radiohead's cool. I actually do really like Wild Wild Life a lot. And I think they're all really good. I think it's a good, enjoyable record. But yeah, pretty much agree exactly with what Cram said. It doesn't have that same feeling of significance that the rest of their catalog does. So number 7.
My number 6 is a difficult one for me to talk about. It's more songs about buildings and food, which I do like. And I don't know how to put this. I feel like they're taking a step forward with this album after the debut, while also kind of taking a step back in a way, if that makes sense. They're bringing in Brian Eno, and some of the stuff that they do better than on the first album is there. And then there's just a little bit of like David Byrne's technique and charisma that gets lost a little bit here compared to the first album, but the sound is cooler, there's more energy, the playing is better all around, and they're starting to get that classic Talking Heads R&B funk rhythm section going. And they're also kind of exploring and playing with a little bit more varieties in style, especially on the Big Country. That's kind of a different sound for them leading up to this point. They still will find themselves a little bit more after this. To me, they're at their best when they're being really cohesively experimental and kind of working within the confines of traditional pop, when they're kind of exploding within that bubble. And in this one, the songs just aren't quite as memorable for me. I do really like Thank You for Sending Me an Angel, and Found a Job is awesome, and The Big Country. There's a lot of really good songs. I just think it's like, it's tough. Again, 6 through 1, I like them all. So it's just kind of finding the little nuances of my personal taste for the Talking Heads in each album. And this one doesn't quite have, especially with just some of the songwriting elements aren't quite there for me, but it is a really good album.
All right. For me, I have True Stories as my number 6, as sure as expected. It's fine. It's sort of, I guess, a continuation of Little Creatures. Wild Wild Life kind of sounds like Stay Up All Night, which I like. I like that pop kind of purposefully, just, hey, let's crank out a radio hit, which I think they did pretty good, when they wanted to. I know David Byrne said after Take Me to the River kind of became their first hit that they didn't want to be a radio band, a singles band. But when they wanted to put out a single, they were almost always good. The rest of the album's pretty good too. Radiohead's good. Love for Sale, City of Dreams, People Like Us, I think are all pretty solid songs. Still kind of got that world music flavor. There's also some Southern kind of, some slide guitar out there too. So it's just a good album. It's nothing spectacular, but I enjoyed it probably more than The critics didn't like it when it came out. I don't know why. Maybe it was a little too conventional, but I think it's a solid album.
Okay, my number 6 is Little Creatures. I have it at number 6, which is kind of low, but I think it's a really good album. I think it's better than a lot of people even think it is. They really, after Speaking in Tongues, this is like a major sort of simplification of their songs and their sound after those more experimental records. I think it's really successful at what it's trying to do and what it's trying to be. I also think this is probably like their most immediately catchy record. I think if you've never listened to Talking Heads before, even though they have definitely have better records, I think this is a good place maybe for a beginner to start and get your feet wet with sort of what the Talking Heads and David Byrne is all about.
All right. These lists are so hard for me to come by because you're making some really good points. I have Little Creatures later. I agree it's a little bit underrated. And I think this one might be, I don't know if it's overrated. I know it gets a lot of attention as a great debut and among Talking Heads fans, but I've got Talking Heads 77, which I really dig. You'll probably never hear me say this again, but it's a little bit too thin for me. I rarely have problem with kind of a thin sound, but I do think this one suffers a little bit from it. But it's awesome. It's frantic and rugged, and it's got that great punk funk fusion, and it's got those eccentric abstract personality of David Byrne, which I love. Really good groove ability, and the whole album's just kind of like over caffeinated and with really cool guitar strumming and playing. New Feeling is great. I really like Don't Worry About the Government. Psycho Killer is good. Just don't know if the songwriting is quite there yet for them to really have these standout tracks that make the album that memorable, but it's definitely a really good album and a really good introduction to David Byrne and the band. It's a good foundation for them to build on. And it's really a mark of no one else really sounds like Talking Heads, and you can hear it right off the bat with this album. So you got to appreciate that. I just like a bit more.
I'm with you on that one, Cramser. It is my number 5 as well. I like it. I don't think I'd ever heard it before all the way through. I know Psycho Killer, although I much prefer the Stop Making Sense version of Psycho Killer to this one. So I think that kind of hurts it a little bit because that's sort of the big track for me from this one. But right off the bat, Uh-Oh, Love Comes to Town has this really kind of Motown feel to it. So I definitely dig sort of where David Byrne's coming from, kind of the influence he's pulling in. But I agree with Cramser. It's a little thin sounding. That sort of super dancey rhythm section isn't quite there yet. I think, probably my favorite part of the band is Chris Frantz and Tina Weymouth. And they really start to shine next album. But there's some, there's no bad songs on this one. It's just not quite there yet for me. I think they get it together once Brian Eno comes to town on the next album. But it's a good debut. It's kind of like the Pretenders, where it's like sort of just completely new and unique and different, and probably blew people's minds when it first came out.
Okay, my number 5 is more songs about buildings and food. I've got it a spot higher than Cramser did, but I pretty much agree exactly with his assessment of it. Brian Eno comes in to produce, so it sounds better than the debut. I think in a lot of ways, the songs are more interesting, and it's probably a more consistent listen throughout. But the debut has some real highlights for me that this one doesn't have. Nothing on this record is really among my favorite Talking Heads songs. So I wouldn't call it a sophomore slump. I think it is a really good record, but only good enough for me to come in at number 5.
All right, my number 4, this is where I have Little Creatures, and this almost would be higher because I think the songwriting on this is some of their just best straight up, their version of new wave pop oriented songwriting. This album does suffer as probably their worst performance album. They don't really let the players have their moments here. Everything is a little bit too constructed and safe sounding. There's hardly any funk on this album compared to the other stuff. It's almost just kind of like their 80s new wave record. David is a little bit too restrained on this album. You don't get inside his mind as much. But the songs, as like a songwriting effort album, it's really good. And She Was is good. Creatures of Love, Lady Don't Mind, Perfect World, Stay Up Late, Road to Nowhere is the closer is cool. It's a really good record. Again, for me, it's just finding that balance of all of these elements of Talking Heads and where it's the best and which albums have the most of. So this one kind of stands out as a songwriting effort for me, and I love it. I think the hooks are good. I think the songs are really good. I think everything they do here as far as that 80s new wave pop sound, they'll do better on Speaking in Tongues. So that's why it's not quite in the top 3 for me. But yeah, I agree with Jason. This album doesn't get quite enough love among critics or Talking Heads fans, but it's pretty darn good.
Again, we agree. My number 4, Little Creatures. Like Cramser said, it's sort of, after Speaking in Tongues, which was like super groovy and danceable, this is like, okay, let's bring it all back to really David Byrne flexing his pop muscles. And there's a lot of different styles. There's some like proto-college rock, some southern sort of rock that shows up. And then you have the super pop, And She Was, which is probably their, most radio-friendly song. And it's really good. It's not a slight saying it's radio-friendly at all. Stay Up Late's kind of a bouncy little pop song. Road to Nowhere, there's a lot of pop on here, but there's some, the non-singles are pretty good as well. Lady Don't Mind and Walk It Down, Television Man's kind of cool. It's a different style. If you really love the art rock side of Talking Heads, you might not like it as much, and that's probably where the critics were like, okay, well, it's not mind-blowing and sort of paradigm shifting. It's just a straight kind of pop record. So but it's a good one. So there's no shame in just writing out some pop gems once in a while.
Okay, number 4 for me is going to be the debut, Talking Heads 77. Like I said, in some ways it's not as good as more songs, but in a lot of ways, the standout tracks really elevate this record. Uh-Oh, Love Comes to Town is awesome. The bass line is so good. Tina Weymouth, super, super underrated bass player. One of my favorite bass players of all time. She writes like simple, infectious, melodic bass lines, and they're always really memorable and cool. But yeah, that song's really got a nice groove to it. And then you've got like a steel drum solo on the first track on your first album. It's amazing. Tentative Decisions is cool. No Compassion. Don't Worry About the Government, Psycho Killer. So those are the tracks that for me put this ahead of more songs about buildings and food.
Yeah, I don't know if I've just heard it too many times, but like I always forget about Psycho Killer. It kind of falls towards the bottom of my favorite Talking Heads songs, but it is a good song, and I always just kind of forget that it's on that album, which is weird. Anyway, number 3, I've got Speaking in Tongues. You're going to hear a lot of the same stuff I talked about, Little Creatures. It's just all better here. Amazing pop melodies, but the funk influence is here too. There's a lot more energy and liveliness to the playing on this album compared to Little Creatures. You even got a nice like bluesy sound with Swamp. Great balance throughout. The whole thing is a really good ride with the rhythms kind of changing from song to song. It's the most of the record is pretty danceable, but each song in kind of its own way. Byrne is very much alive in himself, but kind of mutated and more focused into a pop singer. Moon Rocks is super cool. Whatever problems people have with them, with the art house stuff and they can't get into it, this is the album that can sweep you in. It's much more accessible, but it's got those elements still that make Talking Heads Talking Heads. And, probably my favorite moment of the album is just the jam on Pull Up the Roots. The percussion on it is so cool, but there's a lot of really good tracks on here. Not really. The only one that really doesn't do it for me is no, there is none actually. They're all pretty good. I think I've got 2 or 3 on my top 10 songs list. So this is pretty good. It's very close to number 1. There's not a lot of difference for me in these top 3. So this is a pretty strong bronze medal for me, Speaking in Tongues.
Well, again, I'm with Cramser, and I'm also with Cramser that basically these 3, the top 3 I have, there's no real ranking for me. They're pretty much interchangeable. That being said, I'll put Speaking in Tongues here at number 3. Like Cramser said, it's super funky. The rhythm section is fantastic. Not, the polyrhythms scaled way back, if not completely. And I think it's all the better for it. It's super, I guess this is like white funk, but Burn Down the House, Making Flippy Floppy, Girlfriend is Better are all just killer kind of dance tracks. This would have been great to get out to the club and groove to. And then Slippery People, I get Wild Gravity, maybe sort of a little lull in the middle, but the second half, Swamp, Moon Rocks, Pull Up the Roots is awesome. This Must Be the Place is a nice kind of, it's a pop song, but it doesn't sound like a traditional pop song. It's very unique. Something only Talking Heads could probably do. So it's a really good album. Bring Down the House, just an awesome kind of, again, this, nothing else sounds like this. It's just sort of their own little genre pretty much. So it's a very cool album. Much credit again to Chris France and Tina Weymouth for really just, carrying these tracks.
All right, my number 3 is going to be Fear of Music. Right off the bat, Izimbra lets you know that Talking Heads are completely expanding in so many different directions creatively, and the rest of the record, you kind of hear that play out. Great songwriting, and I think, again, even a step further in her evolution, Tina Weymouth's bass playing on this record is so good. Really good grooves, great bass lines, good songs. Overall, really great record. I just like the other two a little bit more.
Yeah, my prediction is that you have Speaking in Tongues at number 1, but we'll see. Fear of Music, my number 2, so let's keep talking about that. You're right off the bat, you've got that big, awesome African drum beat and the chants and all of that and the world music influence. And, the whole thing is really cohesive and direly urgent to me, and at the same time being really smart and strange. I get this impression that all of these songs are sung with this really intimidating, intense, wide-eyed, just eccentric David Byrne, seeming so crazy and weird. But there's also a weird joy to this album and some really beautiful moments that I think kind of give it a nice breath of fresh air, with songs like Air and Heaven. Right in the middle, I think, are just perfectly put in there. And, I love his line in Memories, Can't Wait, where he says, "There's a party in my mind and I hope it never ends." And that's just kind of how I, almost just like the bumper sticker for Talking Heads. I just feel like all these songs are just a whirlwind of thoughts and anxieties, and that he just puts into music, and it comes out so frantic and awesome, and I love it. This album is fantastic. It probably was my number 1 at some point, but my number 1 is not Fear of Music. It's my number 2.
Well, we all know what your number 1 now is, because it has to be. There's only one left, Cramser.
Sorry, I can't avoid that, unfortunately.
I know, it's the format. Well, my number 2 is going to be more songs about building and food. I think you're both wrong. It's clearly superior to the debut in every way. Production's much better. The songs are catchier. It's a lot closer to the Talking Heads sound that kind of people associate it. Much better rhythm section. The drums and the bass are much better on this album. And it has Take Me to the River, which one of the all-time great cover songs. Probably the kind of definitive version, really. And the rest of it's great. Found a Job. It's got this kind of groove going. It's very danceable. I really like Thank You for Sending Me an Angel. I think it starts out perfectly. The Big Country, I think Cramser touched on this before, just kind of sonically completely different. Brings in that slide guitar, scalding, rebuke of the South, basically. So he's getting a little political on this, but I think it all works. It all works really well, and it's a very good sophomore effort. No sophomore slump for the Talking Heads.
All right. Well, I thought I might catch some heat for even putting this at number 2, and then Joe put it at number 7, so it kind of took the heat off me, I guess. I got Remain in Light at number 2. So the expansion of their sound on Fear of Music, results in this sort of absolute explosion on Remain in Light, where they just totally reinvent what rock can be, what pop can be. I don't think there's ever been a record before or since, really, that sounds like it. It's pretty impossible to even copy it. The polyrhythm thing's going on, the world music thing. There's this sort of paranoia happening. Adrian Belew on guitar on this record, really making his presence felt as well. Just really, really cool, really different, really unique. And I think the interesting thing about it, I read someone said that, it's so far ahead of its time, and normally records like that take a long time to sort of work their way into people's, consciousness, and for them to sort of open up and accept it. But apparently everyone loved this immediately when they heard it, except for Joe. So,
well, my number 1, there's only one left, and it's Remain in Light. Yeah, Jason just nailed it. I'm wearing a Roger Waters shirt, so I'll go ahead and say this is their Dark Side. It is just a totally immersive experience. It's such a journey. Yeah, it's just this big, weird, augmented dimension that we don't know about, and this is what music's like in it. And it's got great grooves. The production on it is just fantastic. Every little detail is just perfect, and it's mostly in the playing, to be honest. So there's a lot of attention to detail in how they were going to craft these little pieces of songs. Born Under Punches is fantastic. you know, and, you know, the production alone in Once in a Lifetime is just, there's nothing like it. It's fantastic. And, you know, a lot of the songs don't stand out as like something you'll just listen to as an individual track or throw in a playlist. It's such just a cohesive unit. You got to listen to the whole thing and just submerge yourself in it. And it's got like this, you know, underlying almost like spiritual quality to it, where like time and space don't exist. And it's weird saying that because it's not this grand, big, lush soundscape. It's very tight and narrowly focused. And I mean, way ahead of its time. And it's also kind of like we're still not there yet. There are very few albums that sound like this. And when we will get there, I don't know. But for now, we've got Remain in Light. And it is the number one, my favorite Talking Heads album.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know why. I just don't get it. Me and pretty much everyone else in the world, because nobody bought this album, and Once in a Lifetime didn't even make the Hot 100, which is an interesting fact. It was big on MTV though, so I don't know. It's just this must be one of those critic records that they love, and the people didn't get. I guess I represent the people.
Yeah, that's always how I think of you right off the bat, man of the people.
I am the critic of the people. Although, I mean, my number one obviously has to be Fear of Music. And, you know, it has some of the same, you know, it's kind of beginning that polyrhythm stuff. It's beginning the world music stuff. But for me, it sounds so much better. The songs are so much better crafted. They're actual songs instead of more like feelings and spiritual, you know, whatever. These are just really good songs. Even, you know, I'm not the biggest sort of world music guy, but even Zimbra sounds pretty cool. It's a cool way to start the album. Like Jason said, kind of announcing that, hey, we're doing some new stuff here. But kind of the weird sort of dissonant parts of Mind and Paper and Cities, you know, you have that on Remain in Light, but here there's like melodies and stuff kind of anchoring them, and I really like that. They're good songs with kind of those kind of, you know, world music elements and dissonance and sort of things you never hear in popular music. But then there's also something like Life During Wartime, which is, you know, just a perfect kind of up-tempo, almost pop song. And then you have Heaven, which, you know, a pop song. You know, there's that influence. I like the world music influence. I think it works. Plenty funky. The polyrhythms are there, but I think it's just better anchored in this album because it has those kind of good melodies and strong songwriting, sort of making them all kind of unique and new and cool and different, but also listenable, which I just don't get from Remain in Light.
Very well put, because with you having Remain in Light so low on the list, and I was like, well, Fear of Music's got to be coming up right after this. And for it to be your number one is nice and refreshing. And I was about to ask you a million questions as to how you could be so different on these two albums, which are probably the more linked albums, but you said it quite well, and I get where you're coming from. And I'm happy that you like it this much. You are my voice as a person, as one of the people. You are my voice.
Right. Cramser called it. My number one is Speaking in Tongues. And I kind of equate this sort of to David Bowie's Scary Monsters record, because I feel like when he did his more experimental Berlin trilogy, Low and Heroes, and to a lesser extent, Lodger, I feel like he was going through a lot of experimentation, doing a lot of different things. And then when he comes back with a straight up pop record in Scary Monsters, he kind of boils that all down and, you know, turns what he learned into a great pop record. And I kind of feel like that's what Talking Heads did here. They take sort of all this experimentation on Remain in Light, they make it a little funkier, a little more danceable, a little more melodic, and the result is Speaking in Tongues. And I think it's fantastic. Again, you know, I think it's uniquely a Talking Heads record. I don't think there's anything else that really sounds like this. And I love every song on it. I think it's really good start to finish. And so, yeah, that's my number one favorite Talking Heads record. And a strong contender for 1983.
Ooh, can't wait to find out what you pick.
Yeah.
That your list went just about as I expected. I kind of thought it would be close to mine, which it was, with just a little bit. Joe's was nothing like I anticipated.
I think Talking Heads, I probably needed to listen to the albums more even, because Fear of Music was not my number one on first listen, but I kept listening. I listened to it a couple times because I really liked that first half with Mind, Paper, and Cities. Just really kind of grabbed me more and more every time I listened to them.
Yeah, and I love all of these albums. Well, I don't love all of them, but I like all the albums enough. But to me, the thing that elevates Talking Heads for me among my favorite artists is Stop Making Sense. It's just one of the best live albums ever. We are going to kind of play off that for our side 3 video, so stick around in a couple days for that. But yeah, for me, live performances really change my perception of a band, and this is just fantastic. The way it's implemented with each new member on each song, and it builds and makes a great live concert footage, and it's great. Some of the songs on it just sound better live than they do on the record, so that's a big deal for me.
Yeah, I think one of my big problems is I heard Stop Making Sense and I really liked it, and I've listened to it a million times, and the songs on there I think are superior in a lot of ways to their album version. So I think that hurt the some of these albums in my mind. I might not hold them as high as they could be. If we could include Stop Making Sense, it would be just a runaway number 1. So I don't know, I think that's had some kind of influence negatively on maybe some of the albums when I've been listening to them.
I am the opposite. I'm not a live record person usually. I love watching Stop Making Sense, but without the video, I never listen to it. So I don't know. I've always gravitate towards studio releases usually. But yeah, I think Remain in Light at number 7 might be Joe's hottest hot take on the channel yet.
Is that more so than In Rainbows being what is like yeah, I guess we haven't got there yet.
We haven't. That has not aired yet.
I don't like In Rainbows.
Well, we'll be getting to that soon. Until then, let us know how you rank the Talking Heads records, which are your favorite. Hit like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the bell so you get notifications when our new videos come out. We will be back tomorrow with our top 10 Talking Heads songs.